Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Matt Pearce, and we've got our usual
good evening.
We've got Dr. Chan. Thank you, Dr. Chan. We've got, and is Ken is our coordinators here as well.
Hi.
And we've also got a special guest today. We've got Kenneth Lee.
Another Ken.
Nice to meet you.
Yep, who's come from Japan. Well, he's actually a Hong Kong citizen, but he's studying at a university in Japan. We've invited him on the show today just as a special one-off guest because his particular thesis and research is to do with internet radio. So a bit later in the program we want to have a bit of a discussion about internet radio and ask Kenneth some questions about it, because I think the listeners will be interested in what your research is about.
Sure.
But before that, we want to perhaps have a little bit of a talk about there's been a couple of protests today. And Dr. Chan, you actually were on the one with LSD.
Two.
You're on two today?
Yes.
It's pretty good going.
What's the third one?
Right, okay.
All of them, we should have a little bit of comment.
Yes.
This is quite important.
I think obviously those, the biggest one in the news is the one to do with Macau, but there was also an interesting one to do with workers' right, to do with LSD, sorry.
Yes.
Just tell us what that was about first.
The LSD protest is a part of the protest against the budget proposal. And this one is about the $4,000 internship program for university graduates, which is a shame for such a government to do so, because the average very minimum wage for an average university graduate at least should be about $8,000. And then now they are saying that I'm chipping in I'm chipping in $2,000 for these companies to recruit university graduates as an internship, which actually is another shame, because they have already graduated. They are going to start to work, and it's not a kind of internship. If you have internship, you have to sandwich it within the undergraduate years. Right? It's not internship. But they say this internship, your business can only chip in. You can only chip in $2,000. Right. No, actually, the government is saying that I chip in $2,000, and then you can chip in from $2,000 to $6,000. But certainly, no one is going to give you $6,000. So they are giving them $4,000 for a university student for a kind of internship within 4 to 12 months. So you ask what would happen after 12 months? They will be still unemployed because the financial tsunami is not going to be faded away so soon. So this is a very ill-conceived budget proposal, so-called a kind of so-called measure to decrease the unemployment rate for the university graduates.
And Ken, you were actually on the protest as well.
Yes.
What was kind of the atmosphere, and what are your thoughts on what Dr. Chan said?
Yeah, as usual, we have around 400 people, and then police say that we have only 100 or something. But the atmosphere was good, and most of them were young people. And I think the campaign from the government, the worst thing is that they set the price, absolute price, $4,000, which is unreasonably lower than the minimum wage we have been talking about for 10 years.
Yes.
And it's for the university graduate. It's insulting. It's actually insult the higher education in Hong Kong. And it's all rubbish, I think. Rubbish government.
I must comment a bit on this too, because actually today a student of mine has SMS me, and then he's saying that after much thought, he's going to decline this kind of internship program. Before, he was interviewed by the TV and say, I would probably accept it, thinking that he cannot get a job. But now he's saying that I would not do it because it's too insulting. It's a real case. I got it in my phone. And the problem with this is actually this measure by the government has a very peculiar effect of setting a very low standard for the minimum wage of Hong Kong. So this minimum wage, the government has pressured to revise it or to set a legislation for it. But then everybody is very nervous what level the government will set. But now with this kind of internship program, the government can obviously say that the so-called minimum wage must be about $4,000 for a whole month, which amounts to only about $20 for an hour. This is
not easy to survive on that in Hong Kong.
So I should say this is a conspiracy by the government.
$2 more expensive than McDonald's.
Yeah. And actually for university graduate employment, actually the government has a very handy policy to do, is to give tax break to all the SME, the small and medium enterprise in Pearl Harbor, Hong Kong enterprise in Pearl Harbor, and ask them, if you got this tax break, you got to employ Hong Kong graduates for R&D. This will have a good knock-on effect. That means they will drain away the university graduates to the Pearl Harbor to do R&D. And then they will bolster up the position of the SME there, and then you will leave those so-called $4,000 jobs for the Form 5 students, the Form 7 students. But now the government is doing exactly the reverse of this. This is a shame.
Yeah, I agree. I think we ought to also talk a bit about the Macau protests. Were you there as well, or? No,
not the Macau protest, but there are two other protests today. The other is exactly about the minimum wage. So actually the two happening the same day is quite foreboding. It's about the inner relationship between these two, right? And the third one is about the Lehman Brothers, the sufferers of the Lehman Brothers. They have themselves organized quite a massive march. But then this Lehman Brothers thing, why is it so widespread? Because it has sucked up a significant proportion of the wealthy retirees, their fortunes, and is sucked up into this Lehman black hole. But the government is doing nothing until now. This is a shame, another shame of this so-called SAR inept government.
You're right. I think we ought to talk a bit about the Macau protest. That's what I'm thinking. In terms of, because obviously that's in terms of the strategy about what's going on there. I can understand why there's a lot of interest in that within the media, because obviously it's been seen as a bit of a symbolic fight and so on. What happened in Macau? But it's interesting what the Macau government have decided to do. They've allowed. They've allowed most of the lawmakers, most of the pan-democrats through. I've heard in the news, but they've stopped two of the legislators and three other activists from going through, and that's kind of an interesting response that the Macau government are doing.
It's totally within expectation.
But it's quite sneaky in some ways. What they're trying to do is kind of what I would call divide and rule. They're kind of trying to divide different groups. They're kind of trying to divide what they see as the hardcore element of the democracy movement, but stopping the more well-heeled, the sort of the more smartly dressed legislators through. It's a sneaky tactic, and I can see why they're doing it actually. But I think the democracy movement has to think about how to respond to that. I think
I myself has an opinion that the whole thing is orchestrated not only by the Macau government and also within the Hong Kong government. The so-called security chief probably has already got information tip off about this whole thing, and then even the pan-democrats themselves has been tip off. They will be allowed through those benign ones, those docile ones. What we used the last time, the word docile. Those docile ones, benign ones, have been allowed through, and it's remarkable that most of those who are not allowed through are LSD members.
That's exactly right. It's interesting they allowed Emily Lau through. Actually, she's now seen.
Democratic Party.
She's now seen as part of the acceptable the pan-democratic group and so on. But
I don't think she's on our side now.
Maybe she was a bit disappointed. Maybe that they did allow her to go through. But it is interesting. Obviously the timing as well, for it to be done straight after the Article 23 legislation has passed. You see, they're obviously. They've thought about it.